Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little. I'm going to be going over a hand history today for rosjon, and I believe this is probably going to end up going on YouTube and also on Float the Turn, so that's pretty cool. Hopefully you guys like it, and if you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to let me know. I actually do not know what the size of this buy-in, or what the buy-in of this tournament is, but we are starting very deep, so I do imagine that this is probably a pretty large buy-in tournament. I am probably not going to go over every hand. All of the hands where there is relatively little action, I'm probably going to pass through pretty quickly. Right here, something I see is kind of interesting right off the bat is I see you raising to 70 on the button here with kings, and I suppose this is trying to get action, but if we go back just a few hands where you had king-queen, notice you raised to 45 under the gun, and I'm kind of wondering why you're doing this. I suppose you're raising your bets, or you're changing your bet sizes based on position, but I could be wrong. Make sure you're not changing your bet size based on your hand. That's going to end up getting you in trouble in the long run. So definitely be aware of that. Here he checks, you continuation bet, a pretty standard amount, and he folds, so there's nothing wrong with that. Here there's an under the gun raise, two calls, and you like to call with pocket tens, and I like this call a lot. I think a lot of players would re-raise here, and you're going to find that re-raising will very frequently get you in a lot of trouble. So I do like the call here. If you re-raise and then one of the players over here plays back at you, you can easily get in a ton of trouble. So now they all checked you on the flop, you can be pretty certain you have the best hand, so you should definitely go ahead and throw out a bet. I'd probably bet a touch smaller, but I don't think it really matters. And you do pick it up. Here's another very good spot to call, to try to get a good flop. Here you do not get a good flop, so you get out of the way. Very good there. Alright, so right here you raise, get called, and then you get 3-bet. Pretty big. With hands like suited connectors out of position, you're generally going to want to fold in this situation. Whenever you are out of position, you don't really want to be taking too many flops with hands that you need to be in position with, and hands like suited connectors pretty much demand that you are in position, and right here you're not in position, so I think this is a pretty easy fold, even though you do have a very strong suited connector. So here you flop a draw, and I do think check raising is probably the right way to go, but like right here, say this guy makes it 3,000, it's a pretty bad spot for you. And also you don't want to check call out of position because it's going to be very difficult to get full value. So you're pretty much locked into check raising here, which I do like, but realize that this is one of the better flops for you, and all you have is a junky draw, so it's not like you're even that happy about this situation. Luckily he folds though, and you do pick up a nice pot. You actually don't play this hand, but I would strongly consider a re-raise here if you think these players are raising frequently. You could make it something like 375. I think that's going to steal the pot a ton of the time, and if you do get called, it's probably going to be only by one player. So be aware that whenever you're in late position, particularly on the button, those are usually pretty decent spots to go ahead and re-raise with hands like King 5 suited. Those are usually pretty strong. Here you open 10-8 suited under the gun, and again, I have no problem with this, but you have to realize that you definitely want to be in position whenever you are playing back against your opponents. Right here, this is a little bit different because you can expect your opponent to have a fairly strong range, so I mean, the reason for that is because you raise under the gun and he 3-bet second position, so you would think he has something pretty good. So I would probably call here, but you have to be very careful post-flop if you do call. Get a pretty good flop. You have a gut shot and a flush draw, so I guess the check raise play is what I would also do here. I'm not really a fan of check calling because if you miss, like say the turn is whatever, like a 9 or a 6, and you check and he bets, you can't really be too happy. Or say, if it's any card that doesn't help you, you can never be too thrilled. So you turn a pair, which is pretty interesting card because it certainly gives you some equity. I mean, obviously right here you're not looking to fold. I think the reason I would have check raised this flop is because I don't really care if my opponent folds stuff like ace queen and ace king and maybe even something like pocket tens or nines or eights, which of course those are kind of tough because you have tens, nines, or eights. Obviously your opponent's not going to fold an overpair, but the thing is if you get an in versus an overpair, you're not too unhappy. So we turn a 10, and so now we actually beat ace king and ace queen, but our opponent betting means he probably doesn't have ace king or ace queen. So this is a tricky spot where I think now you should call, because now if you check raise, your opponent's probably not going to fold anything. You check the river. If your opponent bet the river, I would actually fold here. And the reason I would fold is because I would expect your opponent to have an overpair basically every time, or a jack. Oh, they didn't show who won. Well, I guess you won, so I guess he had ace king or ace queen. Perhaps he had pocket nines. I don't know. That's kind of a weird spot. I'm a little bit surprised you won there. I guess when he checks back the river, you probably win. It seems like this player is opening a decent amount just from the few hands I've looked at, so I would certainly consider going after that guy. Here they check you make a continuation bet. I would probably check back this turn. I mean, I don't know. You can make a case for both betting and checking this turn. If you bet it, it's pretty easy to be drawing very thin. But if you do hit, you want to make sure you win a nice bet. So, you know, I don't think it really matters here what you do. River, you make some value, so I would check and check. The benefits of betting the turn, obviously, you're going to get your opponent to fold a 10 or a king a lot of the time. But of course, he's never folding an ace. So I think I probably would have bet the turn, but I'm not thrilled about it. I don't think it's a great situation. It's never bad to bet again on the turn, especially whenever the turn card certainly helps your perceived range, which it does right there. Here you bet and get called by a guy. The queen doesn't really change anything. Here you lose to ace-king, and you lose to ace-queen, which this guy almost certainly doesn't have. You lose to ace-9, which he, again, probably doesn't have. So now the only real question here is, what is he going to do if he has a draw? And what is he going to do if he has an ace? So if you bet and he has a draw, is he ever going to raise you? And I would venture to say no. If he has an ace, if you bet, is he ever going to raise you? I'd also venture to say no. So I think right here, betting is a pretty clean spot to go ahead and bet for pure value, because your opponent's very rarely going to bluff here, and he's probably not going to overvalue worse hands. So I think I like a bet here. In the past, I've certainly recommended pot control lines in this situation, but out of position, if you check any bets, and then on the river you check any bets, you can't really be that happy. So I think I would probably check here and then see how the hand plays out on later streets. So you check the turn, and you actually just check fold. Wow. I mean, unless you have some really amazing notes on this guy, I think this is way too tight. I mean, your opponent didn't re-raise you pre-flop, so that pretty much takes ace-king and ace-queen out of the equation. He did not raise the flop, so that takes out ace-9 and ace-4. So the only hands you really lose to here are queen-9 and pocket 9s and pocket 4s. And, I mean, that's a pretty tight range, so I'm really against this fold here. I know ace-jack does not look like a premium hand here by any means, but given the way the hand played out, it's effectively the nuts, the way I'm looking at it. I mean, it's a very tight fold. You must have had some ridiculous read on your opponent. But, I mean, I have to have the most amazing read that says my opponent's the tightest player in the world in order for me to get away from that right there. Alright, so it goes bet, raise, go ahead and put in that re-raise. You make it kind of big. I would probably make it something like, probably 1,000 right here. You want to do everything you can to keep both players in at this point, or to induce action. You get called by this guy. That's not really what you were expecting. 10-6-6 is pretty dry. You, again, effectively have the nuts here. You bet your opponent calls, turns a queen. That's not very good. You check, and now your opponent bets. Okay, so the only hands you were losing to on the flop were aces and 10s. And most players would go ahead and put in a re-raise with aces, facing a raise 3-bet, 4-bets. Cold 4-bet, I mean, that's a spot with, if you have aces, to go ahead and get it in. So I think we can discount aces. With 10s, the guy probably would call the flop like he did. With queens, he'd probably call the flop like he did. So now we just have to ask, how would he play a hand like jacks or 9s or 6s, or maybe even something like ace-king if we check to him on the turn, and he did happen to call the flop with those hands. And honestly, I'm not too sure. I would really love to have some read on this guy, but again, this is one of these spots where kings is much more vulnerable in this hand than ace-jack was in last hand, at least in my opinion. So I would be more prone to fold this here, but I think my general line here is going to be to call and then call the river. I'm not looking to fold that often. Well, you river a 6, which is good. You check and he checks, and you win. So nice call down, but I think that spot was a bit dicier than the previous one.